The whole reparations issue begins with the South African government passing a law called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It creates this body to hear the truth, punish people, give them amnesty. And one element of it is that people should get reparations for all their sufferings. And in fact, the government does make a payout of a small sum, really peanuts, to some of the victims. Many of the victims get nothing for technical reasons. Others choose not to appear. I chose not to appear before the commission, so that's a separate issue. Certainly, we felt that the victims, especially those who had lost a son or a daughter, had been killed, been tortured, others who had been maimed permanently so they could never earn a living, that all these people were entitled to reparations. It could not, of course, repair the damage that had been done, but it would at least give them some kind of ability to survive. And we go to the South African government, and the government, to its credit, appeals to the corporations who put money in a fund which can then go to the victims. Corporations are really not interested in helping out, so very little happens there. And you end up with a large number of victims for whom there was no compensation. It works in several ways. The most obvious way is because of the laws which made it illegal for workers to strike. It meant that the South African government was depressing wages. The corporations like Ford and GM could come in here, use cheap labor, make a massive profit just on assembling car parts. Yeah, other cities, but particularly where I grew up, I used to walk past the Ford company every day as a boy going to school. I saw the plant, and all the workers there were being paid starvation wages. But the corporations could get away with it because the government was itself, forcing down the wage. So very simply, corporations were profiting from the exploitation of cheap labor under the apartheid laws. That's point one. But point two, they then buy space in the South African newspapers to announce, we are good citizens, and we are glad to obey the laws of this government because we are very happy to be functioning there. So you get a very clear declaration in support of the system. Point three, I go to the GM stockholders meeting in Detroit, to question, what are you paying the blacks in South Africa? Simple question. Just let everybody know what you're paying them. The vote goes to the floor, and I'm defeated. And they come to me and say, sorry, you did not get 2% of the votes. So the issue will not come up again. It's just stone dead. So obviously the stockholders don't want to know what GM is doing and what Ford is doing. They don't even want to know about the starvation rate. In addition, as you may remember, they bring a black clergyman, put him on the board, a man called Leon Sullivan. Leon Sullivan is sent to visit the workers in Ford, and he says, all I saw was smiling black faces. Everybody was so happy. So I'm saying this is clear collusion. It gets worse. Barclays Bank, one of the major banks, and the American banks are equally guilty, but Barclays is a very specific example, purchases South African government bonds, $500 million worth. And they say, we're buying these bonds, these are South African defense bonds. The money goes to the army. And this is our declaration of our support for the apartheid, well, they don't call it apartheid, the government of South Africa. So we have a whole series of examples of their collusion with apartheid and their profiting from apartheid. Finally, I organized over a period of maybe, well, it took us from 1966 to 1986, 20 years, to get the U.S. Congress to pass legislation called the Sanctions, Comprehensive Sanctions Anti-Apartheid Act, which said no American bank should lend to the apartheid system, and the corporations that were in South Africa from the U.S. could not increase their investment. What they had was there, but they could not increase. But they go in defiance of that by going via Switzerland. So they can lend to Pretoria and say, well, we didn't do it. It was not out of the U.S., but in fact, these were U.S. corporations going via Switzerland. So I think we have enough evidence to show, one, that they profited from the system, two, that they profited in defiance of U.S. Congress and the fact that the UN itself had called apartheid a crime against humanity. So between those two, we think we have a winnable case, but it depends, of course. The Supreme Court in the U.S., of course, is the creation of Bush and to some extent of Reagan. So you can't be too optimistic about that. But I still think we have a good case. And I think, and this is where I add my tag, the struggle for reparations in the South African context will, in fact, revive the struggle for reparations by Black Americans, going all the way back to slavery, and maybe, in fact, also incorporates the issue of American corporations active in the demolition of people's homes in Palestine. Caterpillar has been very active on that and is well known and identified for that. So it seems to me we could set in motion, if we can at least create public support in the U.S. for our issue, that in turn will set in motion other issues.